My name is Bruno Spoerri. I'm a jazz saxophone player, arranger, composer. I did a lot of film music. I'm one of the first ones in Switzerland to use electronic instruments. My favorite synthesizer was the Prophet 5 by Sequential Circuits, because this was really a flexible instrument that I really could play, and that I really could program to, and it had so many interesting sounds. Arp Odyssey, that was one of the very early analog synthesizers, but it was a very flexible instrument. You really could improvise sounds with it. You could, within seconds, you could change to another sound. You could make noises and so on. I had a mini Moog, I had a micro Moog, but I never had a big Moog, because when I was interested in the first synthesizers, it was in about '67, I tried to buy one, but it was so expensive. Then the dollar was almost 5 francs, and the smallest Moog synthesizer was about $10,000. So I really couldn't afford it. So I used presets, but very often I changed them a little bit, or I used them in a not in the normal way, perhaps. When I wanted a new sound, I think I never tried systematically to find a new sound. I come from jazz, and I think one of the most important things in improvising are the mistakes. When I improvise and when I do my computer music things in concert, I hope for mistakes. I hope that something happens that brings me, throws me out of the routine. Well, Kraftwerk is a very special thing for me. When I first heard them, I just laughed, and I said, "Well, that's." I must really say it. When I first heard that, I said, "That's the music that I'm doing when I'm warming up my synthesizers in the morning." I didn't understand that they had a completely different idea of music than I had. And what they did was just exactly the opposite of what I was doing. Now when I hear it after so many years, I think they really had an original idea. They did something very special that I didn't understand then. If you use virtual instruments, for instance, the new all these instruments in the computer, it's much more difficult to, for instance, to change 2 or 3 parameters in the same second. With a real synthesizer, you have your 2 hands, and you can go around and try out many things in very short time. If you want to do that with a virtual synthesizer, you have to use some very complicated interface to do that. It's not so haptic. You can't touch it anymore, and that makes it much more difficult to find really new things. Perhaps you can develop virtuosity in that. That's possible, but there's so many things are pre-prepared, and perhaps there are. Perhaps the people are less patient. They are used to have a new computer, to have an iPad, a new iPhone, and within seconds you can find something. You can do it. It's so easy to to do a decent sound, because all the sounds are good now. It's almost impossible to make a bad sounding sound. Everything is so perfect, and so it gets more difficult to get the dirt into your music. And I think music lives from that, from the imperfect things. There is a sort of retro movement here now. There are really people who want to go back to the old times, and of course they can't go back, because you can't have the old machines are no more around. The old techniques are very difficult to use. I think there's one studio in Cologne where they still have the old Stockhausen things, for instance. There you can do that again, but perhaps you don't have the time that they had, because in these years they needed weeks and months to create some sounds, and nobody has the patience anymore to do that. So they try to, in a way, to recreate that feeling of the old instruments. But I don't know if it is successful, or if it's still only a fashion to do that. In the beginning, if you couldn't handle a synthesizer, it sounded horrible. Today it's almost impossible to make horrible sounds. All sounds are good. And so it, without any real musical idea, without any talent, you can make today music that doesn't sound too bad. In order to get to something that's really valuable, you must work more than before, in a way, because the normal standard, that's so easy to do. The less talented are very often more commercially successful. And I met Bob Moog for the first time, Wendy Carlos, that was in mid-70s. Or when I went to Frankfurt to the music fair and met then Tom Oberheim, Dave Smith. First I thought these were half gods and they must be very rich. And then I found out that these are all very committed people who always took risks, that they weren't rich, that they all were always they always were in danger to go bankrupt. That they had all the big, really big problems financially, but that they went on, that they had always new ideas. They always tried to do something interesting, even if it failed. I think all these people had perhaps more failures than successes, in a way. And I think that was fascinating. And they all had a very funny side. I think I never laughed so much when I was, for instance, with people like David Zinoviev, the inventor of the EMS synthesizer, or with Max Matthews, or they were all very funny and had so many strange ideas too. Of course, I think it's much more difficult to have new ideas because everything is done. So it's much more difficult to have a revolutionary new idea and to find really new things. I don't think that newness is important in music. I think it's important that you find a music that moves people, that you can bring something over to them, that they feel something when you make your music. And I think that's independent of the style, of the way of playing, and of everything that can happen in a very simple song, that can happen in a very complicated orchestral piece. That's, I think, the means or the way you do it is not important. It's important that they get the feeling from that what you're doing. I think very often it's the most simple music that moves people most.